201.
In the early months of 1962, Marilyn Monroe was set to go before the cameras for her 30th film.
503. 504.
She'd been absent from the screen for over a year, and the light comedy Something's Got to Give would offer something of a comeback.
Come on, the water's so refreshing.
Legendary filmmaker George Cukor was brought in to direct.
74.
And cast opposite Marilyn would be two of the world's most gifted and glamorous stars. Dean Martin.
Ellen, get out of there.
And Sid Charisse.
Not like that. Go in and change.
The film would also include a small army of Hollywood's most accomplished and respected character actors.
Excuse me, are you being helped?
You're being waited on.
Right there.
Well, here you go. Let's walk.
But only 8 weeks after production began, Marilyn Monroe was fired. 2 months later, the star was found dead of an apparent sleeping pill overdose. Something's Got to Give became one of the most talked about unfinished films in Hollywood history. For nearly 4 decades, 500 minutes of unedited footage sat in storage in the vaults at 20th Century Fox. The story of the film and of Marilyn's tragic final days was seemingly lost. Lost until now.
Cut it, cut it.
You see that man? That's Max Fabian, the producer. Now go and do yourself some good.
Why do they always look like unhappy rabbits?
Because that's what they are. Now go and make him happy.
By January of 1962, Marilyn Monroe had been 20th Century Fox's most bankable star for over a decade.
You can tell him for me, I think he's simply a doll. And I couldn't be crazy about these old Eastern customs.
Her 20 pictures for the studio had grossed over $200 million at the box office, making Marilyn Fox's biggest commodity since Shirley Temple. But Monroe hadn't worked for her home studio in almost 2 years, and Fox was facing serious financial problems due to costly delays on the epic production of Cleopatra. The studio needed Marilyn back at work as soon as possible. To that end, they sent veteran producer David Brown to entice the star with a script for a light bedroom comedy entitled Something's Got to Give.
Marilyn really didn't want to make Something's Got to Give. She was under a slave contract at that time to 20th Century Fox, having made films away from 20th Century Fox, and the studio was insisting that she live up to the contract, and this was given to her.
Something's Got to Give was a modern remake of the 1940 screwball comedy My Favorite Wife, which had starred Cary Grant and Irene Dunne. Marilyn was to play a woman who returns home after 5 years stranded on a tropical island, only to find herself legally declared dead and her husband newly remarried. The film would be co-produced by 20th Century Fox and Marilyn Monroe Productions, a company set up in 1955 to give Marilyn more creative control over her projects.
Is it true that you submitted a list of directors that you would work with?
I would rather say that I have director approval, and that is true.
This you think is important?
Yes, it is. Very important to me.
In September 1961, Marilyn submitted a list of directors that she would agree to work with. It included some of the industry's most accomplished names, among them George Cukor. But after a difficult experience with her during the filming of the 1960 comedy Let's Make Love, Cukor expressed misgivings about working with Marilyn again.
Ray, I've never been so humiliated in my life. The least you could have done is tell me who you are.
Well, you know, the story in Hollywood is always that you owe somebody a picture. You got out of one, but then you have to do another or something. And I think it worked out that Fox suggested Cukor this picture, and he owed them a picture for something else.
In January of 1962, Cukor reluctantly signed on to the film. Producer David Brown now had a major director and a star attached to the project. But he had no final script, despite the continued effort of Fox's staff writer Arnold Schulman.
He was a great writer, but I was somewhat alarmed when I passed his office and saw that he had removed his desk and was writing in a yoga position. Bear in mind that the myth of Hollywood is far less than the reality.
But the producers knew they faced problems much bigger and more difficult than script rewrites. Monroe's tardiness was now legendary in Hollywood. She had been blamed for creating costly delays on nearly every film in which she starred. To make matters worse, her 4-year marriage to playwright Arthur Miller had just ended in divorce, and the actress was finding consolation from a growing dependency on pills and alcohol. Concerned that Marilyn's emotional problems would only add to Fox's growing financial woes, studio chief Peter Levathes recruited the help of Marilyn's psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson. Levathes hoped that Greenson would control the star's erratic behavior. But what the doctor began controlling was Something's Got to Give. His first move was to push out David Brown in favor of his friend, producer Henry Weinstein.
I got a call on a Sunday from the then heads of the studio. And they said, could I come and see him? And I went down there and they gave me the script of Something's Gotta Give. And I was told not to say anything to anybody about it.
I was told of my impending removal by my future partner and best friend, Richard Zanuck, who said I was in the elevator and this guy, Henry Weinstein, was carrying a script of Something's Gotta Give. Watch your back. Well, I did, and there was an arrow in it.
Director George Cukor was furious at David Brown's dismissal, and his resentment lingered as Henry Weinstein came on board.
I did whatever Cukor didn't want to do, and I just did it. I thought he was, right from the beginning, difficult with the script and everything else.
Two distinct centers of power began emerging on the set. One between Marilyn and Henry Weinstein, and the other between George Cukor and his associate producer and art director, Gene Allen. But both sides agreed on one thing: the script still needed work. Oscar winner Nunnally Johnson was brought in to complete a series of rewrites. Johnson had written How to Marry a Millionaire, which had been a great success for Fox and Marilyn.
Do you know who I'd like to marry? Who? Rockefeller.
Which one?
I don't care.
Now Johnson and Monroe would be working together to update Something's Got to Give.
He said to her, now, Marilyn, wherever you think the line is out of character, put a cross. Where you think the line is not funny enough, put a double cross. Fine. I leave happy. I don't hear from him for a week. I call her analyst, Romy, and I said, what is the problem? And he said, why did Nunnally use the word double cross? I said, what do you mean? He said, Nunnally once gave her a picture which she turned down, and she now thinks he's going to get back at her.
But despite her fears, Marilyn slowly came to trust Johnson. She loved his witty interpretation of the story, as did producer Henry Weinstein.
Nunnally Johnson, I think, was who Marilyn was working with to get a story that she would approve. I don't know whether they were keeping Cukor involved.
One of the mistakes I made was I didn't confer with Cukor, which I should have done. It may have saved me problems towards the end. I was reluctant to do so because Cukor was working with Gene Allen, and I just thought I would undercut all of that.
Cukor was furious to be left out of the meetings. He felt that Johnson's version strayed too far from the original charm of My Favorite Wife. Within 2 months, Nunnally Johnson was replaced with a writer named Walter Bernstein.
Johnson had written a script, and I have no idea whether he then had, whatever reason he had left it, whether he had died or whether, I really didn't know. All I knew was that I got a call from George Cukor.
By now, script rewrites alone had brought the production $300,000 over budget, a problem that only seemed to mirror the larger financial crisis confronting 20th Century Fox. Cleopatra was still running massively over budget, and Fox was panicking from the escalating costs. The company was going broke, and fast.
First we got notes that we should water our own plants because the greensmen had been fired. Then we got notes that the cafeteria was going because there was nobody there. So I said, don't worry about I'm eating my plants. It's true. I mean, there was no, it was like a ghost town.
A dark cloud seemed to hover over the production of Something's Got to Give. And Marilyn Monroe now had more to accomplish and more to prove than ever before. By late March 1962, there were only 3 short weeks left before the first day of principal photography. The race was on to meet the tight deadline. As George Cukor and Walter Bernstein pounded out a new draft of the script, associate producer Gene Allen oversaw completion of the set, an exact replica of Cukor's own home and backyard. The costume department worked overtime to pull the wardrobe together for the entire cast. And producer Henry Weinstein struggled to keep track of Marilyn Monroe.
He was a prisoner, really, of the situation. I had very little to do with him. His main preoccupation was Marilyn, you know, how to get her there, how to keep her working, you know, and it was thankless. It was just a thankless job.
On April 10th, the punctual Marilyn arrived on the set for makeup and costume tests. But to her surprise, George Cukor did not show up to supervise and direct.
And I think it was a big mistake for Cukor not to have done that because she was there at her best and she had to take it as a put-down. I'm sure she did.
But despite Cukor's absence, Marilyn's performance convinced everyone that she was in top form.
And I was so happy because they were brilliant. I mean, she looked extraordinary. She was at her best.
Weinstein couldn't wait to share his enthusiasm with the star herself. But when Marilyn was several hours late for their scheduled meeting, the producer raced over to her home in nearby Brentwood.
When I come there and she's spread across her bed, practically nude and really out. So I called Romy up, and then we called her internist, and they came running over. And this was the first time, and I knew we were in trouble.
Weinstein was shocked at the sight of Marilyn Monroe, unconscious from an apparent overdose of sleeping pills.
And I went to the studio and I said, listen, we gotta postpone this picture. I don't think she's gonna be ready. We're gonna start shooting in about 3 weeks. And said, what happened? She said, oh, no, you're being melodramatic. I said, I tell you, the girl is not able to do this yet. I said, if I came and told you she just had a heart attack, what would you do? She said, well, we would wait. I said, what's the difference? He says, she had a heart attack. We couldn't get insurance. With this, we can.
They felt that she was in somewhat out of control, but still very bankable movie star. And whatever personal problems she had, they felt could be dealt with.
Marilyn's habit of mixing champagne with sleeping pills was well known in Hollywood, and this latest incident rang few warning bells.
The first time I actually got to the house, she had some champagne and she'd taken a couple of sleeping pills she had, and Dr. Greenson became worried, and so she gave me a key to her apartment, and I carried it all the time so I could get in, if I had to, quickly. When she moved out to the Helenas in Brentwood, we had a key to the house in a fuchsia plant that was hanging in front of the front door.
We know now. We know things that we didn't know then. I mean, that's just deadly.
Marilyn had grown dependent on sleeping pills during her rise to fame in Hollywood. She was plagued by insomnia and for the past 2 years sought almost daily psychological treatment from Dr. Greenson to ease her emotional pain.
We knew that she was a manic depressive, which is now called bipolar personality. I think the name manic depressive is better, it's more descriptive. And that always meant that there were emotional problems and that she could have big swings in her moods.
Marilyn was impressed with Dr. Greenson's warmth and understanding. Traditional patient-doctor boundaries soon dissolved, and Marilyn became like an extended member of the doctor's family.
She would eat at his house. Had a small house in Santa Monica with a pool. She would eat there because he wanted to show Marilyn what a normal family was like. I put the words normal in quotes, but so it was really quite simple. And he saw her at his house. He didn't see her at his office. He did everything that was possible, but I mean, he saw the real problems that were Marilyn and tried to keep her functioning.
But with just 5 days to go before cameras would roll on Something's Got to Give, producer Henry Weinstein feared that a solution to Monroe's emotional problems and chemical dependency was eluding even her psychiatrist. Weinstein was left to wonder if Marilyn could ever fully recover from what truly ailed her. 3 days after Marilyn's April 10th overdose, she attended a script meeting for Something's Got to Give. Outwardly unfazed by the events just days before, Marilyn focused her attention on the script and tried to establish a working relationship with writer Walter Bernstein.
One time I went to her house to talk about a particular scene, and she had some ideas about the scene. And it was a very cordial meeting. You know, she was very, very nice, except you also got the impression you were in the presence of Caesar. I mean, she would refer to herself sometimes in the third person. About a moment in a scene, she'd say, "Oh, no, Monroe wouldn't do this," you know. And she was very shrewd about her own image as she saw it.
With the script still incomplete, Q-Corps postponed principal photography 1 week to April 23rd. Marilyn promptly left for New York to work on her role with acting coach Lee Strasberg. By now, Marilyn had been studying with Lee and Paula Strasberg for almost 7 years. Lee Strasberg was the foremost proponent and teacher of method acting, who challenged Marilyn to become a serious dramatic actress.
To go to the actor's studio after being thought of as the glamour girl, empty-headed blonde, to go there, can you imagine what that took? And then to prepare a scene and have to go out there and do it in front of actors. Oh, I can't imagine having to do that. Where did that come from? Except you have to see this enormous need to do better.
What I'd like to do, that is what I would like to accomplish. I would like to be a good actress. And it's not a matter of being on top, because I think some of the best actors and actresses perhaps aren't on the top.
Well, it was a big coup for, you know, for Marilyn to be part of the actor's studio that Lee Strasberg ran. And, I mean, she was a big star and a big personality. And for them to be known as her mentors, you know, and was important to them.
The Strasbergs opened their home to Marilyn and gave her the comfort and security of a family.
We were sharing a room on Fire Island where we had a summer house, and I woke up early in the morning and Marilyn was standing nude watching the sun come up. And I was looking at her going, oh. Then I said, you know, Marilyn, I'd give anything to be like you. She was horrified, and she said, Susie, don't say that. I'd give anything to be like you. People respect you. So I think that what she wanted and what she got from my father was respect.
Marilyn longed for respect and credibility, and while in New York, she sought out the company of the most esteemed artists and writers in the world, including famed playwright Arthur Miller, whom she later married.
Marilyn, I think, felt she had a chance of evolving not just as an actress, but as a woman. And I have a lot of respect for that. The fact that a girl like Marilyn, from her background, was reading Rilke, was reading the poets, was making this effort. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Marilyn planned her return to the set of Something's Got to Give, energized by the week-long stay in New York. But a bad cold she caught from Lee Strasberg began weakening her health. On April 19th, Marilyn landed in Los Angeles, suffering from a serious flu. 2 days later, she was diagnosed with acute sinusitis.
I called her up and I said, Marilyn, what is the problem? She says, well, I'm running temperature, she says. I said, what's your temperature? Just a little above normal. I said, I could walk down the street and get that temperature. She said, yes, that's true, but you don't have to be in front of the camera.
Marilyn's performance depended a great deal on how she looked. And if she really wasn't looking well and had the effects of a cold, maybe you couldn't shoot her if she did come.
Throat and cold problems had resulted in costly delays on almost every one of Marilyn's films. And Weinstein worried the same would happen on Something's Got to Give.
She was easily disturbed by the pressure of work, although she worked hard. When she was depressed, her resistance dropped to infection. There's a phrase that is used by doctors called psyche and soma, which means the psychological, emotional thing, and the bodily things. They affect each other.
On Sunday, April 22nd, studio doctor Lee Siegel reported that Marilyn was too sick with the flu to work. He suggested that Something's Got to Give be postponed for at least 1 month. His recommendation was rejected.
I'm not sure they believed her, and they didn't bother to check with me.
Cukor proceeded as planned, and principal photography was still slated to begin on Monday, April 23rd. That day, 104 crew members reported to Soundstage 14, ready and eager to work.
First day was very lively and everybody was happy. You know, every time you start a picture, you're kind of up because it's something new.
Everybody was very excited about the film and very high, and the film was to start. And of course, the director said, well, I think, Sid, you'll have a couple of weeks where you're not working because we have so much to do with Marilyn and Dean. I said, well, that's fine with me. Call me when you need me.
But that first morning, Marilyn failed to show up.
The phone rings around 7:30, and they said, could you come to the studio right away? And I said, of course.
George Cukor was forced to quickly reorganize his shooting schedule. This scene with Dean Martin and Sid Charisse became the first moment of Something's Got to Give, captured on film.
All right, Wally, get up and go. Camera!
Here Martin's character, Nicholas Arden, returns from his honeymoon with his new bride, Bianca, played by Sid Charisse.
Well, here we are. Home sweet home.
Later, Timmy, front and center, Daddy's home.
Did you order any carpentry work done, darling?
Maybe they're hitting each other over the head.
Cut it, go it.
Cut. 80.
Hello, my darlings.
Hi, Daddy. Hi, Daddy.
Now, is that all you got to say?
No presents.
No present. Look, what are you two doing up there?
Building a treehouse.
Lita, what's the matter with the house? What are you doing up there?
Building a treehouse.
A treehouse? You just said that to me.
Say it again. What are you doing, brother? Building a treehouse, say it again.
The following day, on April 24th, Monroe called in sick again. She even missed a planned visit to the set by the Shah of Iran and his wife, Empress Farah, who were in the U.S. on a goodwill tour.
Ginger Rogers is also on hand to greet the distinguished visitors, and ebullient Bob Hope.
The upper classes, of course, were all pro-Shah, and I have nothing against the Shah. I even liked Artie Shaw, so it shows that I'm neutral on this question. But Hollywood was quite appropriately agog at meeting foreign royalty.
Although the dignitaries were anxious to meet Monroe, she refused to appear.
And I tried to get her there. I called her and said, the Shah's coming, you gotta come. And she said, I can't come because he is anti-Israel. And I think she didn't come because she didn't think she'd be pretty enough.
You know, we're all waiting for Marilyn to come around, and they would say, well, we'll just shoot the scene today with you and Steve.
Their Majesties then visit a set of Something's Got to Give, to which they're welcomed by Sid Charisse and director George Cukor.
Instead of meeting Marilyn, the Shah and his wife watched this scene where Sid Charisse's character, Bianca, appeals to her psychoanalyst, portrayed by Steve Allen.
Cameron!
But I happen to know that Nicholas is madly in love with me.
I see.
That's why it's so maddening, this shyness.
Yes. Well, now. Now, you say that even though... Oh, there you are.
For the rest of the week, Monroe was a no-show, and the company worked around her.
She definitely had sinusitis that summer. She definitely had some bronchial infection occasionally from the drip from the sinus down into her chest. And she felt, at times, definitely weak and depleted by the infection.
191.
On Monday, April 30th, one whole week after production had begun, Marilyn reported to work for the first time. That day, George Cukor shot several takes where Marilyn's character, Ellen, emotes silently, reacting to being at home for the first time in 5 years. On Tuesday, May 1st, Marilyn was on the set at 7 a.m. against the advice of the studio's own doctor. But after only moments, the actress collapsed and was rushed home.
Cukor, he said, now you don't worry about anything. This is all going to be just fine. Marilyn, you know, we have to have patience with Marilyn. This isn't unusual at all. But she's so wonderful that the results will certainly be worth it.
Cukor patiently moved ahead with the scene, featuring Dean Martin and Phil Silvers. Here, Nick Arden discovers that his first wife, Ellen, was not stranded alone on that South Seas island.
229.
Well, they have a report, actually a rumor, that a woman answering the general description of your first wife was picked up by an American submarine.
Well, to tell you the truth,
as was a young man answering the general description of Stephen Burkett, who was reported drowned the same time your wife was. Oh, it's absurd.
A man was rescued at the same time as my wife?
No, a young man. According to this unverified rumor.
They were on this island together for 5 years?
Ridiculous, isn't it?
279.
Marilyn was absent for the rest of the second week, during which these scenes with Dean Martin, Sid Charisse, and John McGiver were shot.
Happy when you...
303.
Camera.
Wasn't I supposed to marry somebody?
Yeah, us.
What?
Yes.
Already?
Well, it's been 5 years, sir.
I mean, they were marvelous. I mean, they were real pros. You know, she was just charming and nice.
She would never say anything. She just went along with the flow. She's very quiet, very ladylike. I think she scares half the crew sometimes. She's a perfectionist. She's just great.
Dean Martin was just superb. And he'd always have a golf club, always be swinging it, always be swinging it. He'd call me in, he said, now sit, nothing's gonna happen. Just be patient, wait it out. I mean, just the opposite of everybody who was running around trying to do whatever they were doing. He was stalwart.
Marilyn may have been out sick, but she did keep her eyes and ears on the set.
All right. Camera.
I got a call from Marilyn one day. She says, Sid Charisse is padding her breasts. I said, Marilyn, you haven't been on the set. You don't know. How can she? Said, I have people watching. I said, well, how can she? She's wearing this negligee. This has a little negligee. You can't do it. She says, you don't know anything. I said, but if you think I'm going to tell Miss Charisse if she's doing to stop doing it, you're mistaken.
On Monday, May 7th, Marilyn called in sick for the 10th time. And now her behavior was starting to test even the crew's patience.
She seemed healthy. All this talk that she had these colds and things, I never saw any evidence of it.
Up to a point, I believed it. You know, I was certainly ready to believe that she was susceptible to colds and, you know, and the rest of that. But I didn't get any sense of drinking when she came to work. I always felt she was on pills. You know, she had those kind of mood swings, and I never felt, except for very rare intervals, that, you know, there was a normal, healthy person there.
Tuesday, May 8th, the entire company shut down, declaring they had run out of scenes to shoot without Monroe. 2 days later, on Thursday, May 10th, it was stated in the daily production report that Marilyn's presence was required for the rest of the script. The star had only worked 2 days, and the show was 5.5 days behind schedule. Studio executives began to worry. They couldn't afford to lose money on Something's Got to Give. Fox needed this film in theaters by October in order to help make up for the mounting debt caused by Cleopatra bills. In Rome, these same executives were handling Elizabeth Taylor with kid gloves, though her own off-screen behavior and frequent illnesses had created huge delays and extravagant expenses. But back in Hollywood, the studio's patience with Marilyn was wearing thin.
I'm sure they had been through this many, many times with Marilyn. I don't think it was the first time. So they knew what to expect, actually, like Cukor did. He really knew what to expect.
There's a lot riding on the project. She certainly had the biggest power of all, which was whether to show up or not.
The fourth week of production rolled by, and Marilyn had completed only a few days of work. Many key scenes were shot in her absence, including entire sequences with the children.
446.
And Kathleen and Michael went to the ponies. My horse bit. You don't have a horse. She doesn't have a horse.
That was good, except you didn't grab it early enough. Huh? When she
Child actors Alexandra Heilweil and Christopher Morley had a difficult time remembering their dialogue and staying focused. Cukor shot take after take with the children, occasionally losing his patience.
Watch me to be surprised. Leave that alone. Come on now, watch me.
498. Speed.
Let's do it once more. Once more. That was very good without cutting.
There
That was
isn't
very good.
any-
Come on. Never mind. Come on, boys. Come on, leave it alone. Now watch me walk away. What's more? Alexander, stop fussing with that, will you please? And watch me.
On May 14th, Marilyn made her third appearance on the set. She was put to work opposite a very uncooperative dog and a very frustrated trainer.
I start like...
382.
Hey, Jeff. Jeff, watch it. Jeff, speak. Jeff, speak. Speak for us. Come on, speak. Jeff, come on up here. Jeff, come on, Jeff. Here, watch it.
Performing a welcome home scene over and over, it was the dog, not Monroe, who repeatedly missed cues and required take after take.
Come on, Jeff. Here, Jeff. Speak for us. Speak. Come on, Jeff, get it. Speak. That's the boy. Here, Jeff.
Well...
I used to come here a long time ago.
He's out of...
Jeff, come here. Come on, get in here. Now stay right there. Jeff, speak. Jeff, speak. Come on, Jeff. Speak. Come on, here, boy. Come on, speak. Watch it. Speak for us. Speak.
Animals are never cooperative, except in rehearsals. A dog will react to a trainer perfectly all through the rehearsals. But the minute they hear a director say action, the animal knows that they can get away with anything. But I remember the poor animal trainer trying to get it working.
Well, I mean, we had her finally on the set. I mean, there were more interesting things you could do with Marilyn than shoot that dog. I just thought it was a waste. A terrible waste.
The next 2 days rolled by without incident. Monroe showed up ready to work with her $5,000 a week acting coach Paula Strasberg in tow. Cukor finally had Marilyn present on the soundstage, but he could not command her undivided attention.
You know, she was upstairs with her coach, with Paula, and she wouldn't come down if she didn't feel like she was ready for the scene, or she wouldn't come down.
Marilyn had relied on Paula Strasberg's guidance during the production of her last 5 films. Paula had gained a reputation for quietly usurping any director's control over the star, a manner of working that made her universally unpopular on the set.
She was heavier than I am. She wore these black capes. She looked like Dracula's assistant. And she indulged Marilyn in all of this whims. You can't treat her this way. She's a great Hollywood star.
Marilyn would look over to her for encouragement and for what to do. It was insidious, you know, and I think it hurt her very much.
Near the swimming pool.
Marilyn went up and down those stairs 10 or 12 times, and every time she would go up the stair, she would look at Paula, and if Paula said no, then she had to do it again. And I could see George just fuming and fuming and fuming.
Cukor hated her, really hated her. I don't think they helped her at all. I think they just pumped her up full of lots of stuff so they could use her.
But Paula Strasberg was not the only strong female in Monroe's entourage. Marilyn's publicist, Pat Newcomb, was also a presence in the actress's life.
Pat Newcomb took control of Marilyn. Between Pat Newcomb and Paula Strasberg, Marilyn she was like a caged animal. Nobody could get near her. Even if George Cukor wanted to talk to her, you had to go through Pat Newcomb.
Marilyn's distracted moods during Something's Gotta Give were also the result of a chaotic romantic life. Rumors flew about a flirtation with President John F. Kennedy and a more intense personal relationship with his younger brother, Bobby, who also happened to be the U.S. Attorney General.
Well, over a period of time, I was not at all surprised that the Kennedys were a very important part of Marilyn's life. And so that I was I wasn't included in this information, but I was a witness to what was happening.
I get a call from Marilyn one day. She says, I'm going to have a date with a very important man. And I really would like to know what questions to ask. I said, Marilyn, well, who's the person I got to know? She says, it's Bobby Kennedy. So I said, you know, we're right in the middle of the civil rights situation. Ask him why he's not being more supportive of Martin Luther King. What are they doing to calm down these riots? You know? She says, well, how do I know which question? He says, it depends on his answer. So I said, well, let's rehearse. Give me the question, answer, and then the next question. We did that. A couple of days later, she says, I have another date. I said, well, how did the date go? She said, oh, it went very well. I said, now it could be more personal. And I don't hear from her for a week. So I call up and I said, Marilyn, how's it going? She says, I don't need any more questions.
On May 15th, Marilyn reported to work despite complaining of a fever.
We'd get reports from the psychiatrist, we'd get reports from the producer, and Marilyn had said this, and oh boy, she is coming in tomorrow. And if she did show up, it was like the second coming. Everybody fell down and genuflected.
Following several hours of makeup, Marilyn walked into the glare of the lights. Cukor filmed this scene where, after a long absence, Ellen Arden talks to her children, who fail to recognize her as their mother.
Are you going to stay long?
I don't know yet. Would you like me to?
I don't know where you sleep.
I don't know either yet. But if that could be worked out, would you like me to stay?
I would.
You would?
I wouldn't mind. Don't get me sick. Again, he got you fed again.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. As I remember, there was a boy and a little girl, and even before we shot, she went and interacted with them to get them at ease so that she could play with them and everything. I remember that.
It was hard because had her children lived, they would have been the same age as the children she worked with. The children loved her. She played with them, but it was sad. Marilyn wanted children. She wanted them badly.
Marilyn's own childhood had been riddled with painful experiences. Her biological father never recognized her as his own child. Her mother was put into a mental institution. And the young girl endured years of emotional, even sexual abuse while growing up in a series of foster homes. Through her years of stardom, Marilyn had been quite open about her desire to have a child. But after several failed pregnancies, Monroe feared she could never have a baby of her own. After a while, even the sight of children reminded Marilyn of a painful void in her life.
Jimmy, you hurt yourself.
Let me go.
Jimmy.
Marilyn had now been on the set, eager to work for 3 days in a row. But early on Thursday, May 17th, it was learned that Monroe was going to take time off to attend President Kennedy's birthday gala in New York. Before production had begun, producer Henry Weinstein had given Marilyn his tentative approval. But now he had changed his mind.
Little did I know we were going to miss so many other days. Now the day comes, and she says, now remember, I'm not supposed to shoot on such and such a day. I said, yeah, I do remember, but Marilyn, we haven't shot an arc. I don't want to shoot. Can't shoot. Then I pick it up. She's going to the president's birthday party. And I said, you're not going to go. I said, you're not going to shoot, but you're not going to go. And no, I'm going to go.
Production reports clearly stated that Marilyn had permission to attend the ball. But behind the scenes, studio head Peter Levathes was imploring her not to go. A week earlier, he had even sent a letter stating, Marilyn, as you know, we are behind schedule with our picture, and we cannot consent to or acquiesce in your absence. But Marilyn's mind was made up, and she headed for New York to perform for the president.
We all knew she was going to go to the president's ball. It was an honor to go to the president's ball. She wasn't the only one that was invited. There were many, and she had permission.
Mr. President, Marilyn Monroe.
Marilyn's legendary tardiness was made a running gag throughout the evening's celebration.
Here she is. But I'll give her an introduction anyway, Mr. President, because in the history of show business, perhaps there has been no one female who meant so much, who has done more.
When Marilyn finally appeared, she was wearing a shimmering silk gown that revealed more than it hid.
Mr. President, the late Marilyn Monroe.
That night, one of her most memorable live performances was caught on camera.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Mr. President. Happy birthday to you.
Back in Hollywood, Fox executives were livid.
She just didn't have any sense of responsibility or any respect for them, had no feeling for them. And they just suddenly, I think, moved away from a professional evaluation to a personal snit.
Everybody, happy birthday!
Well, it was very upsetting to Cukor. You know, the rest of us, we've been in this movie business a long time, and all kinds of things happened, and so it was no big red letter day one way or the other to the crew, just one more episode. But Cukor took it quite personally.
The incident marked a significant turning point on the set of Something's Got to Give. On Monday, May 21st, Monroe reported to work and let Cukor know that close-ups were out of the question. No amount of makeup could hide her fatigue.
When you're there, you just feel it as manipulation, like the crew felt. You know, you were trying to do your best work, and here was this person, you know, kind of pissing on it.
Matters were only made worse the following day, when Marilyn had a fresh reason to postpone shooting. Dean Martin reported to work in spite of a cold and fever. For the next 3 days, Monroe refused to work with Martin for fear of catching his cold. Cukor was forced to shoot these close-ups, heavily filtered to conceal the actress's exhaustion.
Okay. Rolling?
Yeah.
Okay.
496.
Tensions mounted on the set, and Marilyn began to lose the support from the crew she had come to depend on. But everyone was prepared to forgive Monroe's behavior when word leaked out that she would be filming a nude swim scene on May 23rd. The first ever by a major American actress.
500.
Come on in. The water's so refreshing.
It was like panic. I mean, a horror of excitement, people running back and forth.
501.
Everybody was kicked off the set, including me. I'd never been off the set in my life with Cukor, but Marilyn wanted everybody off.
Only the illusion of skinny dipping was planned, but Marilyn took things a step further.
We had a bodysuit for her, where you look nude in the water. And after 2-3 takes, she just tore it off and did it without anything else there.
502. 503. 504.
Marilyn Marilyn posed provocatively on the edge of the swimming pool and made the world take note that she still had a gorgeous body. Marilyn seemed inspired by the scene and by the presence on set of her favorite still photographers. Once again, she was in front of the kind of camera that had fallen in love with her face and her figure years before.
When it was all over, she said, well, this is knocking Elizabeth Taylor off the cover of all the magazines. And indeed, that picture was on the cover of every magazine you can think of.
But even if the temperature in the pool didn't rise, optimism at Fox did. The scene was extraordinary, and Monroe had now been on the set for a solid week without interruption. On Friday, May 25th, Marilyn left the studio looking happier than she had in weeks. But that weekend, she disappeared. No one heard from her for 2 whole days.
I couldn't understand what happened that weekend. That's what, to me, it's the big personal mystery. You know, because she left feeling great, now it was all over again. Maybe she had a disappointing affair.
Some speculated that Monroe's rumored affair with Attorney General Bobby Kennedy was at fault.
People think it's ridiculous that she thought that she could be First Lady. But when you stop to think of whoever would have thought she could have married the greatest baseball player ever, and she did, or the greatest author, one of the great American authors, and she did. In Marilyn's mind, she could do all these things.
But whatever Marilyn needed to get back on track with her role in Something's Got to Give, no one on or off the set seemed to have the solution. On Monday, May 28th, Marilyn called in sick again. Production reports that once stated Marilyn Monroe ill now reported company did not shoot due to Miss Monroe's inability to report for work. The following day, Marilyn showed up to the set, but she seemed to lack focus in this scene where husband Nick Arden implies Ellen was unfaithful during her absence.
All right, Kim.
Adam and Eve.
I was afraid you'd misunderstand about that.
Oh, what's to misunderstand? A man's wife spends 5 years on an island with a strange man.
Would you like it any better if I knew him?
And it slips her mind?
Can we start again?
Yeah.
All you can think about is the way I behaved with this poor little... Okay.
With this poor little fly.
All you can think of is how I behaved with a poor little man who wouldn't harm a fly.
Yeah, one more. That was good, though, huh?
I mean, how long does it take to tell a woman my wife's back? It takes me 2 seconds. It's taken... You've had 2 days. Sorry, George, but we can do it.
At 5 p.m., the company stopped shooting due to Marilyn's complaints of exhaustion. The film was now 11 days behind schedule. On May 31st, the actress's raw nerves were noticeably close to the surface during the filming of this sequence opposite Wally Cox. Here, she uses her feminine wiles to convince a naive shoe salesman to pose as the man with whom she spent 5 years on the island.
Will you have lunch with me?
I bring my lunch to the store.
I'd be so grateful if you'd take it out. Are you free for lunch?
No, the fact is, inferior footwear is made from them. The crocodiles themselves don't make...
Would you have lunch with me?
I bring my lunch to the store.
My foot's grown. Go barefoot for 5 years. Gee.
Good, good, good.
And without mishap, shot this scene with Wally Cox and Dean Martin.
677.
By 9:37 a.m., cameras were rolling.
Eve said you had some questions you wanted to ask me. Nick?
Oh, he has. Ask him. Ask him anything.
Oh, well, let me see. What kind of an island was it? What?
An ordinary island, wouldn't you say?
Like the rest.
Small island?
Not small. Not large.
Medium.
Oh, trees, yes.
No vines.
Well, yes, vines, too.
Water?
Yes, all around.
That's the nice thing about Stephen. He doesn't talk your ear off.
I suppose you lived in tree houses?
Well,
Huts. We lived in huts.
separate huts.
Even during the rainy season?
When it rained, we moved on up into the trees.
How was that, gentlemen?
Cut.
Good?
Beautiful.
Good.
Shooting wrapped at 5:30, and only then did Marilyn's birthday party begin.
The day of her birthday, I picked up the cake, and they were screaming at me that I had to hide the cake because it wasn't going to be brought out until 6 o'clock. They had to get a full day's work out of that woman. That was the expression.
The assistant director, and he looked at this cake, said, well, we're having Marilyn's 36th birthday. He says, get that goddamn cake off the set till we're done shooting at 6 o'clock, then you can have her birthday party. And that was, I mean, they were under a lot of pressure. They finally had her on the set, and they wanted to work, you know.
Marilyn's simple birthday party stood in sharp contrast to the lavish 30th birthday celebration thrown for Liz Taylor in Rome. Marilyn topped off her birthday by appearing at a Dodger Stadium fundraiser for the Muscular Dystrophy Foundation. But the evening's damp, chilly air caused Monroe's lingering sinus infection to flare up. And on Monday, June 4th, Marilyn telephoned Weinstein to say she was too ill to work. It was the 17th time the actress called in sick.
I said, look, I'll come and pick you up. We'll have a special car. We'll have the coffee ready. I should have said I'd had the champagne ready, but...
That whole episode irritated Cukor because he had been very, very, very patient. The studio had been patient.
Well, it's the first time I saw Dean really just got angry. Really, he got very angry. And he started pacing the floor, and George tried to calm him down, and patience, and so forth and so on. And after a while, he said, okay, that's it. And he walked right off the set. And that was it, right there. And that's when the whole picture stopped.
For Fox, this was the final straw. Marilyn had worked only 13 of 30 production days, and the film was now $1 million over budget. Rumors flew that the actress would soon be replaced. Acting as Marilyn's intermediary, Dr. Greenson met with Fox hoping to stop the company from proceeding with its plan.
He assured them he could do it. And he was a pretty convincing guy. Very, very passionate, real New Yorker.
Dr. Greenson negotiated with Fox's lawyers. And here, in these minutes from one meeting, Greenson conveyed that he would be able to get his patient to go along with any reasonable request. And although he did not want Fox to deem his relationship as a Svengali one, he in fact could persuade her to do anything reasonable that he wanted.
He convinced her that he would be there all the time. I mean, I think what's unusual is for the studio to say, I need like a psychiatric nurse to get her through the picture. Why they would think he would have any more success than anyone else. It was a mistake.
But Greenson's promises didn't stop Marilyn from calling in sick. On June 6th, Fox executives held a meeting to discuss Monroe's future. George Cukor attended and strongly urged them to replace Marilyn.
I ran into him, and he said, well, he said it just wasn't running too well, was it? Meaning that he just wasn't able to get it together. And certainly wasn't his fault, you know.
That same day, George Cukor went so far as to slip news to gossip columnist Hedda Hopper that Marilyn was being removed from Something's Got to Give, and that her career in Hollywood was over.
He finally just felt so frustrated and had done everything in the world to keep that production going that he was upset. But he absolutely agreed that there was no way to go on. She was not responding to the scenes. Swimming in a pool, playing with kids, that's all fun, but that's not going to make a movie.
On June 8th, 2 days after the meeting, Marilyn Monroe was officially fired.
She was very upset. It's a very emotional thing to have a studio fire you and tell her she'll never work again in this town and her career is finished. I mean, you know, this was a terrible shock.
Nobody else that I know of could have gotten away with as much as she did on this picture. There would have been decisions made long before they were on this.
I think they just said, we've had it. We got Elizabeth Taylor and Rome running that show, and we got Marilyn running this show, and you've got the inmates running the asylum.
Fox still hoped to salvage the picture and quickly approached other actresses as possible replacements for Monroe. After Kim Novak and Shirley MacLaine turned down the role, Lee Remick was fitted for Marilyn's costumes. On hearing that Remick would be his new co-star, Dean Martin officially handed in his own resignation.
I said, you know, you better look at Martin's contract, which you guys negotiated. I didn't. And it says, if Marilyn is replaced, he needs approval of the star. Otherwise, he's not going to do the picture. And of course, that's what happened.
Dean insisted no Marilyn, no picture. On June 11th, letters went out to the entire cast and crew, informing them of their suspension.
I was a little stunned that, first of all, everything came to a stop that day when Dean walked away. And I was put on suspension immediately, and everything, the production stopped then.
I mean, they pulled the plug. I mean, that was it. That was the end of the show. They weren't shooting anymore. That was gone. We were laid off.
That day, 104 people lost their jobs. Fingers were pointed at Monroe. Marilyn was humiliated, and she feared that there might be some truth to the rumors that her career was over. Determined to fight back, Monroe pitted her sexuality, power, and fame against the studio with a storm of publicity. Between June 20th and July 15th, Marilyn spoke candidly with high-profile journalists, including Life magazine editor Richard Merriman.
She'd just been fired. There was this huge uproar going on, and I think that's why she wanted to do the article. She jumped at it. A huge Life magazine essay would absolutely confirm that, in essence, she was still alive. She was still Marilyn Monroe.
In early July, Merriman conducted 2 interviews at Marilyn's home in Brentwood.
The house was empty. There was virtually no furniture in it. Pat Newcomb was there, so the three of us sat around in the middle of this empty room on these straight back chairs, and we had the interview. It was about a 3-hour conversation. When I arrived for the next, it's about 2 days later, we had a bottle of champagne, and she drank. And she got high, a little high, and suddenly there was a streak of anger that had not been there before. She was angry at the studio. It was just an undercurrent of anger. I think I was seeing closer to where she really was then, which was a very anxious, angry, scared woman.
As Merriman left that day, Monroe made one last request. She begged the journalist not to make her look like a joke.
I think she finally articulated her deep fear about herself and about this interview. I think she finally said it, "Don't make me a joke." I think she felt that on some level she was being treated as a joke.
In addition to waging a war of words against the studio, Marilyn continued her personal publicity campaign with pictures. Monroe allowed freelance photographer George Barris unprecedented access to her in a series of revealing photo sessions.
She was in a good mood. Once in a while, she'd stop and maybe think about problems that she's in. And it would bother her, but she snapped out of it very quickly. And it would bother her, but she snapped out of it very quickly. I think she was afraid her career could be over. And, you know, she worked so hard. And here's a girl that was desperately wanting to be a movie star, not for the money. She just wanted to be famous, and she wanted the world to know her.
The photo shoot continued at a house in the Hollywood Hills, where the star's sudden presence surprised the landlord's housekeeper.
She says, "Is that really Marilyn Monroe coming?" I said, "Yeah." "Would you introduce me?" I says, "Yes, if she agrees to it." So when Marilyn came up, I introduced them. Her name was Louise. I said, "This is Louise Marilyn." And she stuttered and she said, "Are you really Marilyn Monroe?" She says, "I can't believe it." So Marilyn says, "Well, I can't believe it too." She says, "I guess I am. Everybody says I am."
Hundreds of photos were taken over a 3-day shoot. Some of the images revealed the sad, vulnerable, and aging woman behind the actress's platinum blonde hair and makeup, while others celebrated the playful side of America's #1 sex goddess. But Marilyn was doing more to reignite her career than just playing cover girl. Behind the scenes, Monroe was campaigning with her co-stars to get Something's Got to Give back into production.
And a couple of weeks later, I had a telegram from Marilyn asking me if I would be willing to continue with the film, and if she could get the studio to start the film, start it up again. So I told her, of course, I'd be more than happy to do it.
Just weeks after her firing, Fox did an amazing about-face and told Marilyn that they wanted her back. Trade-offs were negotiated and concessions were made on both sides. Marilyn agreed to give up having Paula Strasberg on the set, and in return, director George Cukor would be replaced with Jean Leglesco. On August 1st, Marilyn signed a $1 million two-picture contract with Fox, and plans were made to resume shooting Something's Got to Give as soon as possible.
She pretty much got her way, but she was in control of situations when it was just one-on-one. I don't think she controlled the big picture, but she certainly bits and pieces of it.
Marilyn had scored a major victory with Fox, but with all the pressure surrounding the negotiations, she was having more trouble than ever with her insomnia. By now, she was seeing both of her doctors every day.
I had prescribed, I think, 24 Nembutal, which is a good dose. And of course, she was supposed to take a few every night. But even if she took all at once, it's problematic that that was a fatal dose. We try to keep it down and give her the Nembutal more frequently in smaller amounts.
Marilyn had every reason to celebrate. Her career was back on track, she looked healthy, and it seemed that most of the problems facing her had been resolved. But on Saturday, August 4th, Marilyn turned down a dinner invitation from Peter and Pat Lawford and opted instead to stay at home. At approximately 7:30 p.m., she received a phone call from her former stepson, Joe DiMaggio Jr., and was delighted to speak with him. There were other phone calls to Marilyn that evening.
As I happened to talk to her on the phone that night, earlier in the evening, and she was happy and in a manic phase. So I thought her mental state was good. She sounded cheerful. Apparently something happened to suddenly depress her.
According to her housekeeper, Marilyn retired to her bedroom at about 9 p.m.
Marilyn came to her bedroom door. I was sitting in the living room, and she said, "Good night, Mrs. Murray. I think I'll turn in now." And she closed the door.
Later that evening, Marilyn placed a call to Peter Lawford. She bid a cryptic goodbye to his wife and President Kennedy. Although Lawford was concerned about Marilyn, he did not rush to her side.
Peter Lawford got a call from Marilyn, and she was mumbling. Apparently she was going under from the pills she took and perhaps was calling him as a cry for help. He didn't run over. He was the one who then called Mickey Rudin to tell Mickey Rudin that he'd had this call, and Marilyn sounded funny, and with Mickey checked, and that's when Mickey called the housekeeper.
At approximately 10 p.m., Marilyn's attorney, Mickey Rudin, called Eunice Murray. Mrs. Murray assured him Marilyn was fine. But about 5.5 hours later, at around 3:30 a.m., Mrs. Murray awoke, alarmed to find the light still on in Marilyn's bedroom.
I went around to the front of the house. Turning the curtains back, I saw Marilyn lying on the bed, nude, and I was just alarmed.
Dr. Greenson got there first. She was dead when he got there. And I went into the bedroom and made sure she was dead. There was some rigor mortis, yes, but it wasn't extreme yet. I suspected that she'd been dead at least a few hours.
There are many theories about the events leading up to Marilyn Monroe's death. But on that hot summer night of August 5th, one thing was certain. Marilyn was gone.
I believe she was in a manic phase and that something happened to suddenly depress her, and she grabbed pills there. That she had plenty of pills at the bedside. I think she was suddenly depressed, and in that sense, it was intentional. Then, I think she thought better of it when she felt herself going under because she called Peter Lawford. So, while it was intentional at the time, I do believe that she changed her mind.
As the autopsy report showed, traces of drugs were found in Marilyn's system that her doctors claimed they had not prescribed.
At the side of her bed, there was a lot of Seconal, which I had never given her. Also, the autopsy showed that her liver had a lot of chloral hydrate. I never gave her chloral hydrate, and I don't think any doctor in the United States gave it to her. She must have bought it in Tijuana.
But perhaps the only undisputed fact surrounding Marilyn Monroe's death was that it shocked the world.
I was floored. I had no suspicion whatsoever that this woman was on the edge of anything like that. Think of Marilyn Monroe attempts suicide around the world, punishing those SOBs at Fox, punishing all the people who had been mean to her, who treated her like a joke.
I had several phone calls from ordinary women. The general feeling was that if they had only known Marilyn was in trouble, they would have done everything they could to help her. And so I realized that Marilyn didn't just have appeal for men. Women were aware of the lost little girl inside of her, and they reacted to that.
Marilyn's funeral took place at 1 p.m. on August 8th at the Westwood Village Mortuary Chapel. Former husband Joe DiMaggio arranged a very private ceremony to which none of Marilyn's Hollywood friends were invited. Lee Strasberg read the eulogy, and hundreds of Marilyn's devoted fans turned out to pay their last respects and to catch one final glimpse of the world's most famous, most glamorous, and most tragic superstar. In death, Marilyn Monroe became a legend, an icon whose celebrity transcended her untimely end. She is embedded in the collective memories of anyone who has ever seen her photograph. She has become a symbol defining womanhood, sexuality, and beauty for every new generation. In 1963, Fox recast Something's Got to Give with Doris Day and James Garner and retitled the project Move Over Darling.
Harmless? You call Adam and Eve harmless?
He broke his leg in the crash and he was laid up for 6 months.
Yo, what happened to the other 4.5 years?
The footage from Something's Got to Give was long forgotten in the vaults of 20th Century Fox. Except for brief glimpses in a handful of documentaries, it would rarely be seen by the public. In 1999, with the full cooperation of the Marilyn Monroe estate, a massive restoration project was undertaken. Employing state-of-the-art digital technology, 9 hours of footage was carefully restored to its original CinemaScope splendor. Using vintage scripts and notes from the studio archives, a painstaking editing process began. Random pieces were assembled into a coherent shape, and special consideration was given to the original intention of George Cukor and 20th Century Fox. Now, for the first time ever, is the edited reconstruction of Something's Got to Give. It is one last look at a film that might have been, and a star who will live on screen forever.